Paranormal King Radio Network, bringing you the best paranormal hosts and guests. Bringing you the best paranormal shows and features. Playing the top musical artists from around the world. Paranormal King Radio Network. With the best paranormal hosts and guests. The best in paranormal shows and features. Playing the best musical artists from around the world. Paranormal King Radio Network. The paranormal will never be the same.
You are listening to Paranormalities and Ponderings with the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal Team. Brought to you by the Paranormal King Radio Network and hosted by Frank Lee. Join us for the next hour as we discuss ghosts, spirits, hauntings, and otherworldly phenomena that has yet to be explained in hopes of finding answers. This show is meant to be a resource for those of you who, like us, seek to find answers to the unknown. We hope you find it informative and enjoy the show. And once again, thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning in tonight to Paranormalities and Ponderings. I'm your host, Frank Lee, and we got a great show planned for you tonight. Have an excellent guest for you on the show tonight. It's Faith Serafin. She is a paranormal investigator, researcher, and author. So, Faith, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Frank, how are you?
I am doing wonderful. I've been really looking forward to having you on the show, and of course you stay busy. One of the hardest working people I know in the paranormal, and so we've had to kind of do some adjusting with the schedules, but finally got you here, so definitely glad to have you on the show tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you guys could work this whole thing around my very busy schedule. It really makes a difference, and I appreciate it very much. Glad to be here.
Well, awesome. So we were just talking a few minutes ago about some of the different things that you've got going on, and of course I'd mentioned that you're an author, have several books out there, and have quite a few book signings that you've been doing lately, and a new book that just came out, and been doing a lot of historical research, and so tonight we'll be touching on that and helping everybody learn to give them a few pointers on how to look at a location's history when they go investigate, and a few other things like that. But first I was going to kind of look at your history a little bit and ask you what got you started in the paranormal, and maybe ask what was your first experience, or what started your interest with it.
Well, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences, starting from a very early age, probably about maybe 3, and those types of things. I guess growing up with different things that would happen. Fortunately, I was very, very privileged to grow up in a family that was understanding of those types of experiences. And, I wasn't one of those kids that said, "Oh, we don't talk about those things in front of other people. It was just kind of accepted, in my household. And it was something that made it very normal for me.
That definitely
So,
helps.
yeah, it does. And having that understanding and knowing that, these types of things do happen and people are experiencing them kind of geared me towards doing paranormal research and investigation pretty early on. I mean, I can remember being a really, young kid, probably, maybe 14, 15, and researching, things like that, reading books by Hans Holder and a lot of other, really historical paranormal researchers that made a big difference and impacted my life greatly.
Excellent choice. He was one of my first authors that I studied as well, and if you read Holster's work, his way of describing the paranormal, he went into such great detail, but he put it in a way that was so easy to understand for someone that was just beginning to come into the research area. So that was something that I always found fascinating.
Yeah, and it makes a difference too when you're trying to understand those things from your perspective and other people's perspective too. And that really helped make me understand that there were people that were out there that were believers. So those types of things just kind of, drove that whole that paranormal bandwagon, and it drove it right to where it's at today.
Right. And absolutely, growing up in the area that you're from, there's quite a few historical locations there, and we were just mentioning a few earlier that really stand out. Of course, being there close to the military base, coming from a military background, I have yet to be on a military base that didn't show some type of paranormal activity.
Yeah, and you're talking about Fort Benning out here in Columbus, Georgia. When I wrote my second book, Han in Columbus, Georgia, Fort Benning played a pretty substantial part in that. It also played a pretty substantial part in my newest book, Wicked Phoenix City. But one of the things I found was a little bit unusual, is, I guess, from somebody who's involved in paranormal research, kind of look at all aspects of that, not necessarily just ghosts or cryptids and UFOs, but my publisher actually had me edit out a pretty important story that had to do with Columbus. Not necessarily from a haunted standpoint, but from the aspect of UFO phenomenon. And the story itself is actually on my blog site, but it's a pretty well-known story in the area of UFOs and ufology and people that study that and follow those cases today. But even history, kind of talks about that. But the cover-up that was involved in that was really unusual. It was pretty substantial, and it to this day is debated.
Absolutely, and you always run across those type of stories around the military bases where there's this story that all of the local people know, but it never gets published. There's so much controversy around it. It seems like people want to kind of keep it quiet. They want to avoid kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, but yeah, you make a very good point on that.
Well, you'd be surprised the amount of people that actually don't know or don't have this information about this particular episode with the UFO. There's been such an extensive amount of time and effort that has been put into covering the whole story up, that even a lot of locals and people that were stationed here in the 70s when it actually took place are not familiar with it.
Oh, wow.
It's very, like I said, it's very well known in the UFO community, but actually here locally, a lot of people are not very familiar with it. It's not something that they hear of on a regular basis as far as paranormal phenomenon goes.
Well, so I can imagine that was probably rather disheartening when you have this awesome story, and of course the publisher saying no, you can't include that. I can only imagine how that must have been.
Well, I think that was a little bit of, and I hope I don't catch any flack for this, but I think it was a little bit of ignorance on their part.
Right.
You're talking about anything paranormal, you're talking about things just out of the norm of normal. That certainly is not normal. But I think it was more because they wanted to stick to sort of haunted history from the point of ghosts. That's sort of the way those books are geared. But they let me get away with the werewolf legend. That was right outside of Columbus and Tassleton. So, I'm not real sure. Maybe that was a better story to them than the UFO. I don't know. But the UFO story is out there. It's just been published on my blog.
Awesome. So anyone listening, you'll definitely have to check that out. So, and now there's also some research that you've done around Auburn University and some of the other sites kind of in that general area, and I know you've done some extensive research on Phoenix City, Alabama for your book that you've just recently released about the history of Phoenix City, Alabama, which, like we were discussing, was the original Sin City that a lot of people aren't aware of.
Well, I think it's, we could talk about government conspiracies and cover-ups all day long, but I think it's more of a lack of circulating information. That's kind of what I'm hoping to change one day with being able to publish, the books that I have written and the ones that I'm working on now. Talking about Auburn, the legends that are there on, I think every campus, every university has some, form of haunting or at least some story that, maybe they're putting out there for people to be interested in, or maybe some way of catching someone's attention long enough to sort of push that history through generations. But, I tell people all the time, kind of what we're doing when we share a ghost story is we're actually saving history, just one ghost story at a time. And it makes a difference when you tell a story and there's some shred of evidence or some shred of, truth to it, as opposed to just telling a story that's made up or possibly doesn't have anything historical, or have no historical value whatsoever.
Right.
But when you're researching places, a lot of times you tend to find a little bit more credibility in a haunting whenever you have the background or you have the information to sort of back up some of your evidence or back up claims that have been made about paranormal phenomenon. Phoenix City is certainly one of them. We've been hearing for years and years and years in this area that Cobb Hospital, which is torn down now, was extremely haunted, and there was all these things that were going on in there, and it, outside of being a hospital, and obviously people go there who are sick or dying or hurt, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense as to why this particular hospital would be as haunted as they say it is, and it's just like any other hospital that may or may not have activity. So we threw around the concept that it may be environmental or something like that, but in my research for Phoenix City, I actually found some pretty important information that made me think that there could have been some sort of attachment issue there. There was some really sinister criminal activity that was going on there at the hospital, from abusive patients to an actual baby market, that they were taking newborn infants from their mothers and they were selling them. And botching adoptions and things like that. And there was a local doctor, very prominent doctor, and his wife who were involved, and cannot disclose those names for the simple fact that those cases are still open. So those types of things may contribute to at least the negative energy or the bad energy that's still there.
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, and from what you're saying, I mean, any hospital in itself is the perfect storm for a strong residual haunting, if for nothing else, the construction of the building itself. And then you add in the experiences, the potential for those psychic imprints, and then you factor in things like you're describing, that amount of negativity and the suffering and I mean, wow. I mean, that's significant.
It is when you talk about things from, an energy perspective as well. If the environment is conducive to hold and trap those types of energies, then it would explain why there were so many negative reports of phenomenon coming from that location, for the simple fact that there were so many negative things that were happening there. And it wasn't just, a story or people were trying to tell you something to scare you, to get a rise out of you. These things were actually taking place. That makes a huge difference. So that the historical aspect, or at least having that knowledge, it's indicative of whether or not that energy that's there is going to behave one way or another. So it makes a huge difference. It makes it's a valuable asset of that too. When you go into a location to investigate, you want to have that knowledge firsthand, so you actually know what you might be dealing with when you walk into there.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Absolutely. Now, and you have done just an astonishing amount of research for your books. Because you've got, that's what, your 5th book that you've just released, if I'm correct. Am I right?
Well, what do you think was the 4th book? I have a 5th book that's going in. It should be out sometime at the end of 2015.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's because I was thinking there was a 5th one somewhere. Okay, so
it's there. It's in the works.
Okay. And the reason I was asking is because, to factor in, especially when you're doing the nature of the books that you've done, where you're going in, you're looking at the history of all these locations, and there's not very much history to most of these that's been written down and compiled together. You're having to go through, go here, go there, talk to this person, and it's quite an undertaking for just one account, let alone a compilation of accounts that goes into just one of your books, let alone 5. So, I mean, first off, I'm going to thank you for all of your hard work, because I have read a couple of your books, and you did an awesome job, and they're very informative, and just such an amount of hard work has went into them that I can't imagine. So
I really appreciate that. I mean, just for the simple fact that somebody, is acknowledging how much, this, there's a huge process that goes into being able to research, anything historical, especially when you're looking to validate or, remove a claim of something so big, like it being haunted or some other phenomenon associated with it. So it makes a difference, and you do have to put a lot of time and a lot of effort into not just your research, but making sure your research is accurate, backing it up with historical documents, and like you said, that does require that sometimes I have to go to the state archives to look for things. There's little to no information that exists here locally outside of just people who were around that can tell you about the time frame in Phoenix City when it was Sin City. So going to the state archives and looking through the case documents from the Patterson murder and that trial, things like that is, you spend a lot of time in the libraries and a lot of time with your noses and books and making sure that these things are as accurate as you can get them.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here. Now I've read one of your books that I've read was Haunted Montgomery, Alabama, and one of the things that I can imagine you encountered with it, as well as with your newest book, that with the Wicked Phoenix City, that I haven't got to read yet, but now that it's released, you can bet I'm going to take care of it very soon, because I've been eager to read that one ever since I found out about it. But with those type areas, with Montgomery, Alabama, for those listening, Montgomery, Selma has so much history, not just from Civil War and further back, but there was quite a bit that went on during the 50s, the 60s, during the civil rights movements and everything else. And so you run into a lot of things that I would imagine have been covered up, where maybe the documentation has been changed to protect certain people. And have you ever run into that, and that made it difficult to get to the bottom of a actual case that you're researching?
Well, quite often. We will find where information has been either mishandled or it has been, kind of circulated in a way that makes it difficult to understand from the oldest testimony to the newest. And it's basically where you see people are kind of recanting, testimonies or their resources and where they heard something or how they experienced things. We see that today. That's something that seems to be a very growing trend. And again, talking about conspiracies, and cover-ups and things like that. It seems to be, especially nowadays with the Freedom of Information Act, where you can go and you can get a lot of intelligence when you need it. It makes a difference when you see these things that are being sort of reworded, or things are not, conducive to an original story that may have been put out, years and years ago, or they're not the same as they were in a newspaper article that you've been able to find somewhere in the back of an old dusty book. So things change, and that's one of the reasons why I try to go back as far as I possibly can. I own a very old, rare collection of Alabama history books that, talk about some stories that are so old, I've never even seen them rewritten. So, maybe somebody did not take the time or maybe didn't care enough to put that information out there. But we see where they're coming up now in places that have rumored paranormal phenomenon. So that's sort of how the haunted becomes old, or that we figured out, it's where we go back to, because we can't track it back as far back as we possibly can, then only for about 100 years we possibly just be looking at rumors.
Right.
And different stories that have been written down here and there that people have just heard off and on, and there's really no substantial documents on it.
Right, and that's very similar, like with one famous case we heard about, for example, and of course this really isn't paranormal, but in Birmingham with the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, with the Bob Cherry conviction that happened, where for years and years it was thought to be something completely different, and finally through a testimony being recanted in the case and a conviction, or a confession in prison by another inmate, led to his conviction. So and that's a prime example of what you're running into, and that's great. A great way of illustrating where it's going to make investigating some of these locations very difficult, because if the history is not accurate, then really getting to the bottom of what you're dealing with can be very hard.
It does. It makes things very difficult. And also, I'll add that when you have some sort of knowledge prior to going to an investigation and trying to address maybe specific people, or specific events that happen in the hopes that you'll get a response, it's even more difficult when you get responses or information back that doesn't pertain to the history, and then you're left at a whole different standpoint, and you kind of have to go back and look at other things. Did I miss a specific name that may have had something to do with this, or was this location specific to this particular piece of evidence? I mean, it makes things very difficult. So you have to be really you have to multitask with your information a lot, and you have to take advantage of the resources that you have on a regular basis to be able to use that to be able to go in and substantiate a claim of something paranormal, especially if they're talking about a place or a person specifically.
Absolutely. Now, as far as doing your research for for an investigator who is looking up the history of a location, what would be some good pointers that you could offer them to maybe start off to look into the history for one of theirs?
Definitely visit your local library. This is, and one of the things I tell people all the time is they say, well, I'm investigating this house, or, a newer investigator may come to me or group and say, I'm investigating this house or this location, and we have some evidence, but we're not sure if this may be a prior owner. How can we go about being able to find that? And the answer is actually really simple. You call your local tax assessor's office. You go through the tax assessor's office, and they can take you back, as far back as they have information on a location, and they can tell you, who owned the house, where it was sold. We've got a couple of residential cases that we have taken that we've been able to get documents on where Native Americans actually turned the property owner, or turned the property over to different owners. And that's about as far back as you can go. So it makes a difference when you can do that. Of course, not every county or state has those documents archived, or sometimes, there's been a fire and they've, lost important information like that. But again, this is why we, try to write books and keep this information circulating as much as possible and as accurately as possible, is because, these types of documents and this old information, they're slowly dying out. But that's usually the first steps, and going to local libraries and researching in their archives and those particular places or people that they're looking for. Most of the time, they'll be able to find some information on that.
Right. And what about, what would you recommend as being a good resource for maybe looking into a crime that might have occurred at a location?
Case files. If you have access to case files, and most of the time if it's been a pretty substantial trial, you'll be able to find that. Again, depending on where you live and what the accessibility is, things like that will determine whether or not you can get access to it. But case files can usually be found in your local courthouse. They're usually not too hard to come by. Sometimes, depending on how big a location is, it may just be that their courthouse has got everything, right there in one building, where other locations may have, several places where you have to go. Sometimes records are not always kept in the same place. So it takes a fair amount of research to be able to research what you have to research. If that makes sense at all.
Absolutely. And now you do quite a bit of work with museums and historic preservation and everything, and you've also done quite a few historic locations that you've investigated. So I'm going to throw this question at you. What would be some advice that you would give to investigators or to teams that were investigating historic locations, maybe battlefields or old museums or whatnot, that may help them get better results at those type of places?
Well, from an investigative standpoint, not necessarily a research, perspective on this, but a lot of times we find things like trigger objects and sort of using different theories like the Singapore theory, reenacting certain events, things like that do seem to help, especially in historical places. I actually, and this is great, I love to throw this out there, we have a group that we work with quite often. It's in Kentucky. They are Night Stalkers Paranormal. Awesome, wonderful, fantastic group of people. We've done some stuff with them out at Octagon Hall in Franklin. And, we kind of got brought into this, what they call Paranormal Playhouse. Right. And it is so entertaining, to say the least. And it's, I guess, good for a couple of different reasons. One, we have certain people that will take on the role of certain historical people, and reenact certain types of things that may or may not have happened there at the hall. But in a nutshell, even at the sake of it being sort of a laugh fest, or that somebody's acting is so terrible that we all just kind of bust out laughing, it sort of creates this positive energy if you will, that seems to bring out activity. So if it is not the reenactment itself that is bringing this phenomenon out, or at least helping to make it familiar, if it's an intelligent, sort of haunting that's happening there, it somehow creates an environment of positive energy that these things that are out there seem to recognize and come to. Because now that we have actually been involved in that's been some years ago, where we've, kind of, we're goofing off with those guys at Oxford Hall, that we use the same technique now in different locations. And not only do we have a great time with it, but, it does, we have seen results come out of it. We have seen where, we may just be, so hysterical, laughing at the things that we're doing. And then all of a sudden, it's like, all of our devices are going off. We've got all kind of stuff, jibber jabber, coming through the ghost box. And, we're just kind of sitting there like, wow, I mean, we've created this, or at least done something to get, the other side's attention. So it's different sort of things like that it's not all, hokey pokey, just, I got to flex my paranormal pecs and wear a lot of hair gel like you see on television.
Right.
You can get out there and have a good time with this. It's okay.
Right. And I believe, I agree with you completely on that. And I've found from personal experience that when you go in there with a positive attitude and you bring that positive energy, it's perfectly acceptable, and I encourage it to have a good time, enjoy yourself, to be serious when you need to, and be focused, but enjoy yourself, be positive, have that energy with you, and put that into the environment, and you're going to get better results. I believe that wholeheartedly. But you're talking about the reenactments. I used to participate in some Civil War reenactments, and it reminded me of a few experiences that I had where we would go, we would show up on Friday night and we'd set up camp, and we would actually set up the old canvas type or style tents like they used during the Civil War. We'd set up camp Friday evening, camp out Friday night, do a reenactment on Saturday, and camp out there Saturday night, then do another reenactment on Sunday, then break camp, go home. Well, when we'd be there, Friday night would be kind of quiet, but Saturday we'd get out there, do our reenactment. Well, Saturday night, when everyone would go to bed, it seemed like every time that we did that Saturday reenactment, Saturday night was always extremely active, and no one was out there really investigating, but you would see shadows, you would hear things you couldn't explain. Just the unexplained activity would always peak. It was, so I agree with you, the reenacting situations in those haunted locations does make a difference. I will vouch for that 100%.
Oh yeah, and I think we've seen that on even different television shows, and not to knock all of them certainly, but different shows, and following the paranormal community, you're going to see where you have different personalities that are involved in paranormal investigating, and you definitely see, even from a television perspective, that there are certain personalities that seem to attract more paranormal phenomenon as opposed to others. Right. So when you talk about even just that influence on an environment, it definitely impacts the way that you're going to collect evidence. It makes a huge difference, and I think it's a pretty valuable piece of knowledge for people to take that with them whenever they are looking into new methods and new techniques. It's not necessarily about doing the same old thing over and over again. We see where we have to change up, quite often, just to be able to stay out of the monotony of it, and hopefully, generate some new ideas and some new capabilities for us to be able to collect data so that we can review and hopefully find some evidence.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. And now I want to run this by you. And maybe not necessarily directly related to this show in particular, but the new show that just came out, Ghost Stalkers, which I think is a very interesting concept, where the two hosts have both had near-death experiences, and their belief is that because of that, they're more adept to experience paranormal activity, that it seems to be more attracted to them because of that near-death experience. What are your feelings on that, and cases that you've encountered? Would you agree with that, or what?
I would say that I do, and for a couple of reasons, and one even more closely and personal than maybe some others. We've taken our fair share of residential cases, with clients that have had situations like that, or have had some sort of not necessarily near-death experience, but extreme injury or illness that has somehow left them susceptible to things like that. They seem to perceive them a whole lot stronger than maybe other people would. But from a personal standpoint, we have a new volunteer on our team, and she does a fair amount of work with us as far as research. She's a little bit limited, but it doesn't keep her from being involved with what we do as far as research goes. But she actually had an accident several years ago, and ever since then, she has had some unusual experiences. Now she's, talking with her and being close with her now, as a part-time team member. She has, informed me that there have been a few times when she was younger where she had some things, unusual things that happened, but ever since her accident, it seems to have intensified or triggered maybe that mechanism in her that allows her to perceive these things a little bit stronger. So, and she actually was a client to begin with because of this. This was something that she was really struggling with, and we were able to kind of go in and help her family out with that particular situation. And now she's, working with us to help us, with other people that are going through the same thing. So it's kind of like, one hand washes the other, and you it's a karmatic sort of thing. You give into the paranormal community, and somehow or another, that good karma always comes back to you in the way of being able to help somebody else. So it works out really well.
Right, and from a parapsychological standpoint, the one theory that I've seen that I subscribe to, and when you said people with the traumatic injuries and things, something that my mind automatically went to is people with brain injuries and people with certain mental disorders or limitations, that there's that theory that I say theory very loosely. I'm not really going to call it a theory, because I've seen it too many times to really call it that, where when the brain becomes maybe limited in one area, it's like it compensates in other areas, and many times it seems like it's perception of things that the average person can't see. And have you ever encountered situations like that?
We have, and one of the things that, and this was actually brought to my attention not too long ago, one of the things that it kind of puts us on the fence as paranormal investigators in more ways than one is that, we have to handle all aspects of anything that has to do with, any sort of injury or the possibility of a mental illness somehow, some way, very delicately, because certainly, unless we have some sort of clinical degree, we cannot go in and diagnose people and explain to them, well, this is your official diagnosis from, Dr. Serafin is we just don't do that. It's not going to happen that way. But it's something that we have to be responsible for as paranormal investigators, that we handle it very delicately. The psyche of someone who is experiencing or thinks that they are experiencing something paranormal is very delicate.
Right.
And so it's got to be handled that way. If people go into a situation where they believe that they're being haunted by some demonic force, or that they're being oppressed, or something like that, the first thing that I tell people when they contact me and they say, do y'all remove demonic forces? Is there something that you can do to help me exorcise this demon? I'm already on the end of that and telling them, as a paranormal investigator, I cannot make that claim. My best advice to you is to seek out clergy. Because I believe this wholeheartedly, that when you take on the role of something like that, of making the claims to be able to go in and remove those energies, or help, with, a supposed possession or something like that, that the knowledge behind that is not as beneficial as the knowledge behind that person who is experiencing these things. And that takes to a very personal role. When you start to get into things like that, it doesn't leave you a whole lot of room to screw up when you're dealing with somebody who's already in a very fragile state of mind. So, do you make those claims and go in and say, yes, and screw these people up even worse? I have seen it so many times, it makes my stomach turn. And it is a peeve of mine as a paranormal investigator when people say, oh yeah, we've cleaned this house, we've cleansed this house, we've exorcised this demon, we've done this, we've done that. When essentially these same clients that they have will contact another team and say, we've had this issue over and over again. We need to get some help. And it's either one of two things. It's that the people that they contacted did not make good on their claims, or that they are trying to seek out that information in somebody that will come in there and say, yes, this is absolutely what you have, and call up the Vatican. And people just don't understand that things don't work that way. So as somebody who studies that very closely and works with it, on a regular basis, in my whole 25 years of being a paranormal investigator, I have heard one story, just one, that even remotely made me think that the possibility of possession could have been right up underneath my nose and me not have known it. Right. And that came from a preacher down here in South Alabama. But it's not something that I discredit, but as somebody who does a lot of research on the subject, I've only seen where the Vatican only even documents about 100 to 200 cases a year.
Right.
So it's not that there's not more potential for, possessions out there, but that maybe they're finding other reasons for why things are not what they think they are. These people are not possessed by demons. They maybe have some sort of mental illness. So that's the reason why I put that advice out there for people to handle that very delicately. That's not something that I think anybody, unless you are certified through a church somewhere, some sort of clergy, should even remotely mess around with.
And I absolutely agree. And to add to that, from a psychological standpoint, something to consider is the symptoms of fear, anxiety, and depression are more physical than emotional. And
they can manifest that way.
Yes. And for someone, if they're under that stress, that they believe their home is haunted, they're already under all this great stress that they have no place that they can go get peace. They think that they're being attacked. They think they're being haunted. So by the time they've made that call to contact you, they're already in absolute distress. And if you tell them, yes, I think this is a demon or whatever, then you've just added to it. And
you contributed to that fear. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so what you've done is you've just gave them validation and added to that stress level. It's like, okay, well, I've called in their mind, they're thinking, okay, well, I've called a professional, and they're saying, yes, this must be the case. So now it's multiplied, and you'll see a lot of times after that, the attacks will get worse and things like that. And then that makes it hard to separate, well, are these attacks truly paranormal, or is this a result of their stress and anxiety? And it really complicates the cases. So that's always something to consider.
Absolutely, the impact that can have on somebody, and not just the individual, but their family and the home itself. Because people will communicate these things. They'll go in and say, "Yeah, these ghost hunters came to my house and said that Satan lives in my bathroom."
Right.
And I mean, it tends to travel. I mean, that's just one of the things that I think goes with gossip more or less. But I mean, it's a problem. I've seen it, more than I would like to in the paranormal community. It's something that I really think should be handled and put into check a little bit more often. But unfortunately, it seems to be the sort of run-of-the-mill influence from television. And
Right.
I think that that's something that I think more television personalities should be responsible for, to be quite honest with you.
Right. And a major misconception too, like you had mentioned with the Vatican only approving a small number of exorcisms. A major misconception that you see is people tend to think that the Roman Catholic Church goes in with the belief that when they start that exorcism, that they are convinced at that time that the house needs an exorcism because it is a possession case. And that's not the issue. That is not the case by any means. They go in with the belief that there is no activity there, that they go in completely skeptical, and they maintain that usually until just an absolutely just mind-blowingly significant event happens, if it happens during the exorcism ritual. Then they might change that. But when they go in, they're believing that there isn't an entity there, but they're doing that for the benefit of the person that is there. And typically it's someone who attends that parish or whatever. So that's something to consider that a lot of people don't understand.
It definitely is. It is. Unfortunately, it is part of what we do as paranormal investigators. But I think the term gets thrown around a little bit too often, and I think it's sort of it's situated in a lot of ways by people who are actively trying to seek out that thrill.
Right.
And it's something that I mean, if you want a thrill. Go ride roller coasters.
Right.
That chasing demons is not necessarily going to be in your best interest for a lot of different reasons, and it's because there's not necessarily the danger of actually finding one, so much as it is the people that are involved in those types of things may need a whole lot more help than what your average run-of-the-mill paranormal investigator thinks that they can give them.
Right. Absolutely. Excellent point. And with that, have with some of the haunting cases that you've researched, have you seen patterns at certain locations from the reports of the activity? That
Occasionally we do. Patterns as far as supernatural activity, or patterns in the actual client?
As far as the activity goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of your, anybody that's been actively investigating for any amount of time, you start to see the trends. You hear from people, and they tend to tell you things like, it's, a cabinet slamming, or items are being moved around. The lights are flashing here. I feel this, this specific way in this location of my house, or, just the examples always tend to be the same. They just may be more or less depending on, where that location is, or the individual client. Obviously, those things kind of vary. But the fact that it always seems to be, just the same kind of phenomenon kind of puts us in the position where, we're almost kind of feeling like we're dialing in the specific frequencies per piece of activity, if that makes sense.
Right.
If a client comes to me and says, well, I have my cabinets are slamming here, then obviously we're going in there and we're looking for everything from, loose bolts in the cabinets to, wind coming in and out of there. Is there, a place where a draft could come through? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you go in and you try to, actively see first. And one of the things that we tell our clients right off the bat and all the time is that, you live in this location. You've had all these experiences, or you claim to have all these experiences where, all these things are happening to you, but we're only going to be in your home for a certain amount of time actually trying to document this. We make no guarantee whatsoever that we will be able to document it or experience anything whatsoever. A lot of times, if a place has so much activity, we can go and we may have something, at least something will happen while we're there. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's haunted or that we can walk out of there and say, oh my gosh, that's just the most haunted house in the entire universe. There's just, all these things happen while we were there. That has never happened to us. Never. And I think it's, again, talking about misconceptions. When people watch television, they tend to look at, this from start to finish in an hour. They've been able to put together a whole investigation, the review and the reveal. And a lot of people don't understand that there are days that go into that. And certainly I've worked with enough production companies where I know what it feels like to be up for, 48 hours or more and trying to get everything squeezed together and get that back to a producer and just praying like hell you don't look like roadkill on camera the next day.
Right.
So,
And there's nothing like the joy of when you do an overnight investigation. Then the next day, as soon as you recover from that, then you're faced with the data review.
yes.
And I tell people all the time, and they don't realize this, but I tell them that for every hour of video or audio that we capture, you're looking at least 2 to 3 hours of review time.
Not to mention the amount of equipment that you use. If you're in a location that has, you're investigating 3 parts of a location at once,
Right.
you're looking at 3 different recorders,
Absolutely.
so that's hours and hours and hours. And so, that has a lot to do with having a really jam-up team. And I am so fortunate to have such great people on my team that are just so knowledgeable and very, very understanding especially when we take residential cases where I tell them, hey, look, these clients really need this stuff to be reviewed. We need to turn it around in, a week or at least a week and a half. Let's get on it. Of course, we all have regular jobs and families, but, they always do that. They always put those things aside just long enough to be able to get those things together so that we can provide our clients with the best possible information we can give them, for the time that we're there. And it makes a big difference. It makes I think, a huge difference in the way people will kind of spread that around. I mean, obviously there are social networks for people, to find paranormal investigators, but, anybody can throw up a Facebook page and say, hey, yeah, I'm a ghost hunter. I'm going to come get that out of your house or, talk to your great Aunt Betty. But it makes a difference when you can provide them with that information and still be active in moving along and progressing so well. And having a great team has everything to do with that. Everything.
Absolutely. And word of mouth is the best advertisement you can get.
It certainly is. It certainly is.
When you have one client that has one of their friends or family members say, hey, I've got this going on, and they say, well, these people came out and investigated my house, and they were helpful. They checked it out. They respected it, the house. They were nice. They knew what they were doing. They got my data back to me real quick, showed me what they found within a week or two. That's all the difference in the world.
It really is. And, we find quite often where, and don't get me wrong, we have our fair share of clients that are just, you can't satisfy them no matter what you present to them. And a lot of people kind of look at what we do as, again, misconception. They see what's on television. They say, oh, this is hokey ghost hunters out here with all this equipment. They don't even know what it does, but
Right.
they don't understand that there's quite a bit of knowledge that goes into the technical aspect of paranormal investigating, being able to provide clients with information that will be helpful to them in some way, or at least provide them with awareness so that they at least understand how to live with or deal with what they're experiencing. That, again, the review time, getting things back, travel time. I mean, there's so much that's involved in that. I mean, and that's one of the things why, I always try to give my team props when I can, because without them, there would obviously be no team, and it
Absolutely.
makes such a huge impact on families, especially when we can get to them and provide them with the information that they need in a timely manner. I mean, a lot of times they're at their wits' end when they're contacting us anyway. So the least we can do is try to help them. That's what they're searching us out for anyway.
Absolutely. And I know you don't have a whole lot of time tonight, so I wanted to, while I've got you here, I wanted to bring up a couple of your books, because, like I said, I've read a couple of them personally. I've read Haunted Montgomery, Alabama, and I've also read Haunted Auburn and Opelika. And so I can give those my personal seal of approval to anyone listening. Definitely pick those up, read those, you'll love them. I want to get my hands on Wicked Phoenix City as soon as I can and add it to the red list, so look for a review coming soon on that one. So I'm looking forward to it. But so yeah, tell us a little bit about the books that you've got out there and where people can find those and everything.
Wicked Phoenix City was released this year, and it was an absolute joy to write. We got so far had a lot of really good feedback on that one. Not necessarily that it has a lot to do with hauntings, but definitely some very wicked history nonetheless. It's been incredible. So many people have turned out for book signings, and every now and then I have a book signing where I've got them standing in line, but that has become almost a regular occurrence this year with Wicked Phoenix City. So I always try to tell people, if you see it in the store, or if you can get it on Amazon or however, and you get your hands on it, do it. Get it now, because my local bookstore is selling out of them, and they're like, people are coming in here and they're ordering it, but we don't know if we're going to have it for Christmas. We just don't know. We can't keep them in stock. So they're moving. So I'm advising everybody, if you want Wicked Phoenix City, get it now. But Haunted Montgomery was released last year, and of course it focuses on the area of Montgomery, spills over into Prattville, and it talks about the haunted history associated with the city and some of the those outerlying regions, Bear Creek Swamp, the old Cross Garden that's out there, and then Haunted Columbus seems to be one of my top sellers at events. Every time I do a panel and talk about, different kind of magical creatures, werewolves are always in there, and there's a very substantial legend that's associated with a place just outside of Columbus, Georgia, in Talbotton, and that story is actually in there. It's actually one of my favorites for Haunted Columbus. There's, lots of great history in that one, as well as Haunted Auburn and Opelika, and I'll key you in on a little secret, since you have Auburn and Opelika and you're looking to get the other books, and I hope that any listeners out there will take this into consideration as well. In the Haunted Auburn and Opelika book, and all my books have little bits and pieces of me in them. The last story in the Haunted Auburn and Opelika book is called The Hughley Homes, and that actually talks about my personal home.
Oh, wow.
That is actually where I live now. And talks about my family's property and the different things that have taken place out here that, I believe are substantial to the actual haunting that's here. And in Haunted Columbus, it actually talks about where my house came from in the chapter about Eubanks Field, because my grandparents actually bought one of the houses that's out here on our property from it was part of the old airborne barracks that were there at Eubanks Field, and they moved it out here and remodeled it in the 80s. So there's quite a bit of my own personal history that's in each one of those books as well.
Right, so it doesn't get much more close to home than that. That's for sure.
That's very true, and I won't let on how personal some of the things with Phoenix City are. But we'll just we'll leave those up for the readers in their discretion. They can kind of figure that out for themselves.
Right. So no spoilers on the show, but look for
No
it
spoilers
on
on
the
that one.
so maybe on another show we'll fill them in on a little bit more after they've had a chance to
Sure.
read it.
Right.
That sounds great. Now where would be the best place if they're, because of course, maybe if they're not local or whatever, where would be a good place for them to find the books? I know they're on Amazon, and anywhere else that you would recommend, or
Well, I know Amazon has them. eBay Books. There's several online bookstores where you can get them. But any Barnes and Noble, any regional or Books a Million that's in your area, and a lot of times even just kind of your run-of-the-mill mom and pop stores, all they have to do is contact my publisher, which is the History Press, and their website is www.historypress.net. You can actually buy the books directly from them. And, of course, Amazon, they have them for digital readers, Kindles and things like that. But they're not hard to come by. You can get them pretty much anywhere, and request that, they be sent into your regional distributors, again, like Barnes & Noble and Books a Million. Occasionally, we have them for sale on our website. Right now, we are actually completely out of stock. That's why I'm telling everybody to go over to Amazon to get them. Right. But our website is alabamaghosthunters.com. And when we have them there, people can go on there and they actually come signed. I sign tons of them, and then we take them to our warehouse and they ship them out from there.
awesome. And I'm almost scared to ask this because I know how your schedule's been here lately, just from talking to you. But I'm gonna go ahead and ask anyway. Do you have any events coming up that you'd like to put out there?
We do. We are actually working on our 2015 venue, or our 2015 schedule with new venues right now. That information will be released on our website in January, probably sometime within the 2 weeks into the new year. They'll be out there for people to go on there and see. But we're really excited to be adding actually 2 new places to our venues. Right now we're hosting at Port Columbus at the National Civil War Naval Museum in Columbus, Georgia. We are hosting at the C.A.S.P.I.R Library and in Union Springs, the 3 different locations there, the Josephine, the Old Poly Jail, and the City Cemetery, as well as a couple of new places that are coming up in Tallahassee, and possibly 2 more that are opening up in Gulf Shores later on this year. So we're really excited to be hosting those events. And of course, our events, they're called Terrified, and those are fundraising events. We keep, as small as 5% of the portions of those that basically just cover our travel. A lot of times we're coming out for lodging when we have to do these events, but almost 100% of those proceeds go back to that location to help them with funding, restoration, preservation, just whatever they need to help them stay alive.
Right, and that's the way it should be.
Absolutely.
And and do you have any more book signings coming up as well?
I actually have one more
you.
signing. I have one more signing, just one more. That's coming up next month, December the 13th. I will be at the Phoenix City Library signing books there, and they will have books there for sale, so people can come in, they can pick them up, and whether they're gifts or anything like that, I can personalize them. I'll also be talking about upcoming events and things that we have going on, again, projects and stuff like that. So people will be able to spend a good hour sitting in there talking to me or listening to me tell them different stories. Also, too, sometime after the first of the year, we will be putting more information out there about our haunted museum and paranormal oddities that we will hopefully be opening sometime within the next couple of years. We're working diligently on that. we have more items that are pouring in on a regular basis. We're
Wow.
adding to that collection regularly, so we're looking to do that within the next few years as
That
well.
will be awesome.
Yes, it's unusual things here.
And and to anyone who is anywhere close to Phoenix City that you can make that book signing, definitely go out it. Definitely be there for that. That will be great. And when you get the museum a little bit closer to getting it going, you've definitely got to keep me posted on that. I'll harass you about that one. So.
Well, anytime you want to talk about what we have going on in here so far, the collection is substantial as it is now. We're just collecting bits and pieces of things and sort of, kind of getting things organized so that we can open the museum to the public at some point. That's proven to be rather difficult, some red tape with the county going on with that, as you can imagine. So, but we're fighting to make sure that this happens, so that people can come view the collection and they can see these things. I have items from all over the world. So if there's at any point you want to talk about that, and some of the things that we have here, I would love to do that. That's not something that I've actually done publicly as of yet. So I'll give you that invitation. That'll be an open invite for you.
Awesome. Well, I will most definitely take you up on that. So, well, anyway, I know you're on a tight schedule, and I don't think I've ever talked to you when you weren't. That's why I knew when I asked you about your events and book signings, I knew you were going to have several going.
Right. I try to squeeze in as much as I can. Sometimes I don't even know. Sometimes I don't even know if I get up sometimes I just don't know if I get up. But just kind of like recirculating every day.
Right. I don't know if you sleep.
I may not. I actually may not.
Right. So either way, you do a fantastic job. And I will say this, being one of your readers, and as well as one of your followers, we appreciate your hard work. So definitely
That's
keep
great. It makes me feel very motivated when people tell me that. I will give you that. That it means so much to know that people really appreciate it.
Definitely, it's great that we have people that are collecting this information, putting it out there for people. That's an awesome thing that you do, and you do a great job of it. So we thank you, and I really appreciate you being on the show tonight, and hope to have you on the show again before too long.
Absolutely, yeah. Just drop me an email and we will work out the details on that.
Okay, that sounds great, because and I know to plan early so we can work that out, because of the way your schedule is. You definitely stay on the go, but hey, that's part of it. You're working hard for a good cause. So, anyway, like I say, thank you so much for being on the show, and to anyone who wants to check out your team page, it's alabamaghosthunting.com, if I've got that correct.
Yes, alabamaghosthunters.com, or we're on Facebook as the Alabama Paranormal Research Team. All the books that we've talked about tonight are also available, or they can just look up Faith Serafin. I'm on Facebook as well. They can hit me up as any way they want. Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus. We have all those social networks. That's how we stay in touch.
Awesome. So yes, anyone listening, definitely look at their, check them out on Facebook. Look at their website. They've got a lot of great information on their website at alabamaghosthunters.com. Got a education page that's wonderful. So definitely check them out. And Faith, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And I'm going to wish everyone listening the same.
Well, I appreciate that. And I hope y'all have a wonderful Thanksgiving and great holidays coming up. And hopefully we will get to talk to you guys again really soon. And thank you everybody tonight who listened. I really appreciate it. The support is great.
And thank you everyone as well, and look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Paranormalities and Ponderings with the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal Team, brought to you by the Paranormal King Radio Network. We hope you enjoyed the show, and will tune in again next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Please be safe as you're out there, especially if you're investigating the paranormal. Take care, have a good night, and happy huntings. Thank you again for the C.A.S.P.I.R Paranormal.